Thanks for joining, everyone. We'll be talking about the planning for the holiday season this year, particularly in light of some of the volatile economic instability that's happening at the moment and has done over the last couple of years, which has kind of made it even more important to use data and plan for these events. I'll just give you a very quick overview about myself and Similarweb. I'll give you a bit more detail about Similarweb in another slide or two from now. But I started my career in market and consumer research originally. I then moved into the TV and media world at Freeview, which for those of you in the UK may know it, but it's the largest free-to-air TV platform in the UK. And from there went and got some fashion retail experience at ASOS, where I worked for a couple of years and was an end user of Similarweb at ASOS. Fell in love with the data and the products and made the move over in November 2023. For those who aren't familiar with Similarweb, as a brief introduction here, but we're a digital market intelligence platform for market research, audience, and website analysis. We have tools that span across SEO, PPC, display and affiliate marketing, plenty more to do like within that search, various other features, app data, website visits, things like that, all powered by trillions of data points and trusted by some of the world's top companies for the actionable insights that we are able to provide. So I've already mentioned this slightly, but we're going to cover this holiday planning season. So first we'll take a look at the macro forces impacting the e-commerce landscape and how this might affect consumer spending in this coming year. We'll dig into how consumers approach the holiday season in general. And finally, we'll take a look back to last year and some of the strategic levers that brands and retailers can kind of use themselves for this upcoming season, taking hints and tips from past years. So to give you a bit more of a detailed background as to Similarweb, but some of these stats kind of speak for themselves. We kind of have billions of digital signals across website, app, search, marketplace, and this is all able to be turned into these actionable insights I mentioned before. We have data in over 190 countries, capturing data from over 100 million websites, 8 million apps, 6 billion keywords, 5 million retailers, and over 250 million product SKUs. We help brands, retailers, marketers, analysts, and more answer some of the toughest questions. And in e-commerce specifically, we can analyze where demand is shifting, what competitors are gaining ground, and what's driving performance, and perhaps what's not. So let's jump right in. So we're starting off here looking at the current economic situation. So if we look back to last year across, this is US, France, and the UK, particularly in Europe, households were very focused on getting through the month and not splurging during peak season. Inflation was a dominant headline for much of the year and much of the year prior to that. If we fast forward to 2025, we're seeing a different picture. Inflation rates across many key markets have continued the downward trend that began in late 2024. And for consumers, that should be good news. It should give them more appetite to spend, should be good news for both retailers and brands and retail in general. But it might not quite be as positive as that. There's obviously a lot of talk that's happened recently with the tariffs introductions and more geopolitical instability and more economic instability, not quite knowing what's going to come next. And as a result, shoppers will probably still be remaining fairly cautious. They've been conditioned by this uncertainty, and brands and retailers alike must kind of address this and adjust accordingly. So this easing inflation does create opportunity, but only for those that have the agility to monitor this change and adapt in real time. And much like this economic world that we're living in at the moment, the e-commerce landscape is evolving at a rapid rate. The industry sits at the intersection of various macro forces such as inflation, anxiety, geopolitical disruption, and AI innovation is a big one, and an increasingly fragmented online landscape. So the winners within this will be those that can navigate through all this chaos and find some clarity within it all. So what do I mean by this like increasingly fragmented landscape? Well, I mentioned, sorry, how quickly it's been evolving. So if we look at some stats in the UK from April 2025, there were over 1 billion visits to e-commerce sites and over 170,000 active e-commerce websites. 84% of the visits to these sites are held by just the top 1% of players. But despite this, less than 4% of consumers only visit one industry and one site in the industry in one session. So, in other words, it's never been easier to launch a store. It's never been harder to sustain the traffic, win visibility, or defend share and have loyal customers. Competition in that long tail of the sites is extremely fierce. And I mentioned this AI revolution, but it means that the barrier to entry is lower than it's ever been before. There's a big AI presence. And with generative AI tools, it's easier than ever to spin up these product pages, create ads, launch on places like TikTok, and create a very legitimate competitor overnight. So if you're trying to plan your next big holiday push, you're not just fighting the traditional big legacy players, you're fighting algorithms, resellers, new emerging technology, and emerging players you've not heard of yet. And here we are kind of looking at the impact of some of this. So we are seeing that in this overcrowded and chaotic market, some players are really seeing huge growth, and that tends to be coming from these Chinese retailers. They've seen a significant shift in demand over the last 2 years, while domestic website visits in China have been declining. International interest has surged. Uh, Visits from global markets to these Chinese players has risen by 27%, reaching a peak of nearly 3 billion visits in March 2025. And it's surging in both emerging and developed markets across Europe. Portugal leads the way with 38% growth. And so who are we talking about when we talk about these? Well, unexpectedly, Temu, AliExpress, Shein all lead globally in total visits for these retailers, reflecting their broad international reach and how well known they are. But actually, the biggest growth is coming from these smaller, more category focused brands. So within the consumer electronics space, you've got players like Honor and Anker. And this highlights that dynamic that I was talking about, where some of these like more specialized niche players are just growing rapidly alongside some of these established marketplace giants. So what does this all mean for the upcoming holiday season? We will kick off another poll quickly about your holiday strategy and when you kind of look to lock that in. But we will take a look back at last year and explore how consumers might approach the holidays in 2025 with all of that economic those economic issues, sorry, in mind. I'll give a minute or two for people to answer here. So it seems like we're very split again. There's a broad spectrum of when people look to lock their holiday strategy in. So a little bit more waiting towards the end of Q2, but equally the same amount of people more or less tweaking plans right up until the season starts. So that's very interesting that there's broad differences between retailers and brands here. Right. So firstly, how do consumers balance these periods of celebration and spending? Well, if we kind of think about the recent tariffs and this continued instability and whether that does continue to, or whether that does result in upward price pressures, it might not significantly damper consumer activity this season. As I mentioned last year, many consumers were already navigating financial challenges, but remained eager to fully embrace the festive period. More people planned to shop compared to the previous year. That being said, while intent to purchase did increase, many people did plan to spend less than they had the previous year, which was more common trend in some of the older generations who you might associate with having potentially more disposable income to play with. So in this context, again, staying attuned to these shifting market signals in the months ahead and thinking about balancing both price point with consumer aspirations is going to be key. And again, with that in mind, it becomes clear that Black Friday specifically will be yet another crucial retail event in 2025. Last year, consumers were again keen to take advantage of retail deals during the Black Friday period, with planned participation again increasing compared to the previous year. And in fact, while many e-commerce retail industries saw declines in holiday traffic, the Cyber 5 period often told a different story. You saw visits rising in that period year on year as shoppers started to strategically time their purchases to align with peak promotional moments. Here we've looked specifically at the fashion industry, but this aligns with many people's thinkings at the poll at the beginning, where people might sort of look to time their purchases a little bit smarter than maybe they had done previously. And I think if these economic conditions do worsen, a similar pattern is likely to emerge. Consumers will become more value conscious and start utilizing these key sale windows to stretch their budgets. So the importance of this smart promotional timing and clear value messaging can't be underestimated. So if we think about that, like promotional timing and messaging, like when should we be doing that essentially in terms of these in the run up to these events? So consumer evaluation looks to last about 2 weeks prior to purchasing. If we look at this sort of calendar chart here, we see that category page views peak about 14 days in advance of the purchase peaks, accelerating basically in early November as shoppers start to look to secure these key purchases before December and avoid the pressures of last minute shopping. That said, not all categories perform the same. So, for example, within fashion, both browsing and buying peak together, indicating that those decisions are often more instinctive and led by style rather than as much research as maybe some of the other categories. If we look at consumer electronics, purchase activity peaks much closer to Black Friday, reflecting these consumers' expectation of discounts during the event for higher ticket items and really waiting for those discounts as opposed to just buying in before that event. Just reinforcing again the need for this careful promotional planning, be that in the form of discounting or advertising, like really making sure that your strategy is aligned with when consumers start to search for some of this stuff. So we've dug into how consumers might approach this holiday season. So the natural question becomes like, how do I respond as a brand or as a retailer? So the first lever of something like this section that I want to introduce you to is like utilizing some of these earlier year sales to predict holiday performance. We've obviously spoken a bit about Black Friday, but if we think about some of the other key retail events in the year, with Prime Day just around the corner in about a month or so, we can look to maximize performance in the Q4 holiday season through these earlier events. So if you look at the top performing products in sort of October to December, they're quite often the same ones that experience sharp sales lifts during earlier year discounting events. And with that in mind, like using these events as predictive signals for holiday demand and products to push during the holiday demand can be really valuable. Seeing what performs well in these events, using that as a way to adjust inventory or your marketing and promotional strategy for Q4 can be extremely helpful, a valuable test bed for spotting these products in these earlier year sales events. In both of the examples here, the same trend was shown. They're both very different category of products in different regions, and both showed significant Prime Day growth, and then saw a significant lift in Q4. Next, we have an example of focusing strategy on demand and not just excess stock. So here we've looked at the metrics for sales for Dyson Airwrap in Q4 2024. So they saw strong consumer demand, albeit potentially not in purchases, but in product views in the run up to Black Friday. It'd been steadily climbing in the lead up to Black Friday. Sales not necessarily increasing, but views and research and keyword search increasing in the weeks leading up to the event, showing that shoppers were holding off for a potential deal on that. And the Black Friday promotion served as the trigger rather than the driver of these sales. So a modest 2% drop in the listing price for Q4 versus the previous year resulted in 11% revenue uplift. The discount simply activated this demand rather than the demand activated by the discount, essentially. So consumers want deals on products that they desire rather than products that the retailers themselves or brands themselves want to push onto them. In a cautious market like the one we have on our hands at the moment, shoppers are aiming to stretch their budgets further, focusing on value and essential purchases. And for brands, this underlines the importance of staying accessible on price while still delivering quality and trust. So you really need to offer products now that meet real needs, but maybe without the premium pricing, as consumers look to try and make every penny go further. So we've got a couple of examples here from the beauty category, but from both skincare and hair care. And you'll see that the two more modestly priced brands outperformed the higher priced brands in both units sold and revenue year on year. Customers are increasingly looking beyond brand names, relying on things like social media, reviews, user opinions, forums like Reddit, even ChatGPT and other Gen AI sources to kind of fine-tune their research. And brands can use this to their advantage by offering products with a premium look, real results, strong consumer sentiment, look to push their the qualities of their products and themselves in some of these through some of these methods, and position themselves as high quality yet affordable alternatives to some of these pricier options. An example of this working within a brand's lineup comes from Sony. Price sensitivity doesn't mean shoppers aren't willing to spend. It just means that they want their money to go further. And that's where the brand strategy really matters. If we look at Sony's performance in 2024, it's a standout example of how aspiration, when paired with well-positioned alternatives, can be a winning formula. So they're not reliant on one product. They give consumers a variety of options to cater to. Their overall sales were up 68% year on year, revenue up 68% year on year. All of their top performing products were headphones. If we look at that range, we see that they had the high demand premium models that are highlighted in the green here, but they didn't just stop there. They also create a supporting cast of lower tier models that help Sony reach those more price conscious consumers, but without diluting the premium feel, and still keep the aspirational brand value within their range. For other brands, again, the takeaway is clear here. Flagship SKUs aren't just about prestige, they're a conversion engine. When you pair them with more accessible options, don't price potential customers out, give them an alternative, essentially. To wrap that all up, in a season defined by both caution and uncertainty, those that come out on top will be those who start early, adapt quickly, and base every decision on data. Those of you who said that you already had your strategies locked in by the end of Q2 look to be potentially making the right decision there, planning early, getting everything in place. equally, those of you who say that you'll be tweaking last minute, again, using data to your advantage, really honing in on new trends and stuff. Again, smart decision. But having a plan and sticking to it, I think, is the key here. With competition at its peak and consumer loyalty more fragile than ever, standing still is not an option. Um, we've explored a few of the ways to drive success this holiday season, but there's much more to uncover. And with the insights and tools from ourselves, it's all within your reach. Um, there will be time for questions at the end. So if you want to start getting your questions in the chat now, please do. I think there's a Q&A function that I'll be looking at. This webinar was crafted from a larger holiday planning report that we released a couple of weeks ago. You can use this QR code to get that report on your phone. I think it will be sent out via email to those of you who attended today. All of this data was pulled with the help of our shopper solution, which is a go-to solution for market intelligence across Amazon and a few other marketplace domains. And again, you can access a free trial to the shopper product with this QR code here, using that to input your details and get a free trial to investigate all things Amazon. And with that, I will see if there are any questions. Cool. Just going back to here. Yes, so that someone asked for the report QR code, so that's here. And someone's asked for the free trial QR code, so I'll move it to that in a second. Question here around highlighting Prime Day as an early predictor, and does that apply to other lesser known sales events? For instance, Verizon Red Hot Deal Days, or one that happened earlier in the season. I think it's the case by which it applies to all earlier year sales events. If we look to some of the data from the again, I know it's using Prime Day as an example, but the Prime Day that was in October, same trend that we saw. Products that performed well tend to be the ones that performed well in November and December as well. It's not a case by which people only bought them in that sale event, even though that Prime Day happens to take place in what we would consider the Q4 holiday retail period. Again, they're valuable cases to see where the consumer demand is and use that to your advantage in the Q4 season. And it's not just Amazon that do these events. Obviously, you've mentioned a Verizon one, and obviously Memorial Weekend with a lot of other retailers doing that. But other retailers have seen the benefit of this early year retail event as well. There's plenty of retailers that will have competing deal events at the same time as the Prime Day. Off the top of my head, Target, Walmart are both likely to have discounted events in July. There'll be many others that will do the same as well. A question here saying, are consumers starting their holiday shopping earlier each year? I think that is the case, and I think part of that is to do with these discounting events. I think Black Friday was kickstarted in the US, quite a big retail event in the US, but it's become a retail event globally. Many consumers using it to their advantage to secure discounts on gifts, get shopping done earlier, kind of spread that cost a little bit, make the end of the year not quite as expensive as it was in the past, perhaps. And again, I mentioned the October Prime Day, but that's also now another discounting event that people use to their advantage to secure some deals on some products that they're planning to gift or whatever else they're planning to do with it in the Q4 season. So I think we do start to see traffic build up earlier and earlier each year. And I think it's clear that retailers are seeing that as well by starting those discounting events earlier in the year. What are the standout differences between D2C brands and larger retailers in holiday performance? I think the difference between the two of them, or if you, I don't know if I understand this question correctly, but essentially balancing sort of visibility and reach with like being able to own the whole experience is really vital. So you can obviously do things potentially like tailor the experience to your customer, loyalty strategies, position products, kind of really target a specific customer with the products that you want to sell based on the data that you have to them if you're doing it through your own site. When you're kind of targeting them through maybe more generalized deals on some of the larger retailers, you're just hoping for scale there. So it's a case by which you, yeah, balancing visibility and scale with loyalty and potential increased lifetime value if you manage to get people to convert on your own website or store. Which digital channels are driving the most growth for retailers during Q4? Um, so yeah, there's obviously an evolving world that we're living in. I touched on the AI stuff, but traditionally there would have been a lot of activity through like paid search, sorry, social influencer, things like that. I mentioned some of these new sources that are becoming more prevalent and consumers are using more and more. And that's not to say that these like more traditional channels are not still driving the majority of traffic and visibility into your products and your websites, but I would say that there's potentially less growth within those channels, and that the growth is coming from some of these more chatbot referral sources and influence from those. And that maybe if you're thinking to try and get ahead of the competition, that should be areas that you're focusing on rather than potentially some of the more legacy options. And that's not to say don't focus on those, as I say, because that's where the scale is at the moment. But the growth, I think, is coming from these new innovative um, channels.